I'm John Bailey, gemstone artist and founder of the Faceting Academy, and I want to help you have more fun and success with your faceting. You can learn this stuff now, and then you can also get more time-saving and fun-making information at facetingacademy.com. Today, let's learn how to recondition or decontaminate a Corian lap. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because if you've had frustrations polishing different materials, then you're not alone. When I was learning to facet, it was fast and it was easy and it was enjoyable, all except for the polishing part, right? So there were so many different laps and polish recipes, and then there was whether to score the lap or not score the lap and how to score the lap, and I ruined some expensive laps too while I was learning. And so when I was new, pretty much every lap was pretty expensive, maybe $100 and more. And I didn't know that I could just go to the countertop store and get some Formica or a chunk of Corian, or just order a Corian lap on the internet. That wasn't going on at that time. And so there wasn't any voodoo polish or anything like that to just smear it on a cheap Corian lap and then just you can quickly polish just anything that you want to polish just about. So polishing was, in the words of one of my friends, John Frankie, he used to say polishing is voodoo. And that's exactly why, once I finally created the universal polish, that's why I called it voodoo, was because that's what John used to say to me. So before voodoo polish, we had to keep a whole bunch of laps handy. You had to have a tin lap, and you had to have a plexiglass lap, and you had to have a Dynadisc, and you had to have maybe a tin lead or a bat lap when those finally came out. You know, that was a real wonderful thing. Maybe a ceramic lap. You had to have all these things, and then you had to have diamond powder, and you had to have some kind of alumina stuff. You had to have cerium oxide, maybe some tin oxide, maybe some chrome oxide. So I have all this stuff just to be able to polish. So when I was developing Voodoo Magic Polish, I tested it mainly on the Corian laps because I wanted a lap that I knew was just going to be available. I wanted it to be common, I wanted it to be cheap, and everyone could get it. I didn't want to have any headaches with all these $100 laps all the time. So that was a pretty good strategy. And the thing was that the Corian surface, it can become glazed or work hardened, and then the scoring will also polish out, and then it doesn't hold the polish, and then it's not very forgiving when polish or swarf gets balled up on the lap, and then you get cat hair scratches, and the fun factor starts to shrink. So I also didn't have a virgin Corian lap for every polish test that I conducted, because it took me months of testing 100 times a day to figure out all the polishing ingredients for my Voodoo polish and for my XXX. So how do you fix a glazed or even a contaminated Corian lap? And I've done this lots of times, and it's pretty easy, though you need to use some care and some caution. So the first thing is, how do you know if your lap needs this? Well, first of all, if it's contaminated and you're getting great big scratches, and you clean it off with some solvent and that doesn't resolve it, probably need to resurface the lap. So that's for contaminated lap. If you're concerned about whether or not the lap is getting glazed or it needs reconditioning, how do you know? So the first thing is, if it won't hold the polish, that means the polish seems to be wiping off rather than polishing the stone. And it doesn't seem to be sticking. It's almost like if the lap seems like it was made out of glass and the polish is just sliding off. That's a good indication that your lap is glazed. So the indication number 2 is the lap doesn't seem to be polishing very much for the amount of time and work you're putting into each facet. If it's just taken a lot more work, and even if you recharge it, it's just not polishing well, that's an indication. The third thing is that along with slow polishing, if you're getting little cat hair scratches, that could be an indication that the lap is a little bit glazed, because the surface gets hard and slick, and there's no little valleys for balls of swarf and balls of extra polish and stuff to fall into. So when the facet face comes around, it can just press that stuff into the valley, and that way it doesn't scratch the facet. So the fourth thing is, if you don't feel as much drag when you're sweeping the stone across the lap, if it feels kind of slick, like there's no friction, a glazed lap will cause that feeling, like no friction between the facet and the lap. That's another indication. So there's 4 main indications. It's if the lap won't hold the polish, if it doesn't seem to be polishing fast, if it's throwing cat hairs, and if there's just, you can't feel very much drag when you're sweeping the stone across the lap. Any of those 4 things, those are probably pretty good indications that you're going to need to deglaze the lap. Now when you get these symptoms, inspect the lap. Prepare to inspect the lap by cleaning the lap thoroughly. I use 99% isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle like this one to cut the polish off the lap and clean it thoroughly so I can see it really well. I spin the lap at a low speed, give a generous spray of the alcohol, and then wipe the lap with a tissue. I repeat this process a couple of times and you can see the polish comes right off. I'll repeat that you need to repeat the process a couple of times to really get all the polish off, otherwise it'll really destroy your carborundum sandpaper. So stop the lap and begin to inspect, looking for shiny areas like the ones you see here. These shiny areas are the things I was talking about. They're going to be harder. There's no place for the balls of swarf or balls of polish to go as the facet comes around. They also won't hold the polish, so the polish will be sliding off. You can see with areas this slick all the things that I was talking about. And this is another view of the same lap. This is a dry lap. This lap is completely dry. There's not water on there, there's no oil, there's no polish. All of that shiny surface is caused by the lap being glazed. So this is a pretty severely glazed lap. Really needs to be resurfaced. This is what it'll look like when you catch the reflection of your faceting lamp. Here you see me getting the lap into the wash basin. I use a bucket to keep it off the bottom of the basin. Makes it also easy to work on. I use a sanding block, and it's much better to use a sanding block than to try to put the sandpaper on a flat surface and rub the lap on top of it. This is a high-density polyethylene. It's actually a dot block you see. This is 120 grit carborundum sandpaper. It's the wet type sandpaper that an auto body shop would use. Do not use the dry type, only the wet type. The dry stuff will contaminate you. I also use an orange cleaner. I like to use this for my wetting agent. It helps remove any remaining polish. And you want to make sure you don't use any detergent with any abrasives in it. If the detergent or the soap that you're using is clear, you can see through it, that's how you know there's no abrasives in it. So wet the lap down really nicely. Take the sanding block and work. Notice I'm moving the lap as I'm sanding, and I'm not sanding a lot. I'm also making sure that the pressure is even from the inside of the lap to the outside. I'm overlapping the center hole. I'm moving the lap around, sanding just a little bit as I go in each location. Continuing to move the block, move the location of sanding. That keeps me from creating valleys or hills or really destroying the trueness of the lap. You can get away with this if you're careful. You can resurface a lap a large number of times before you wind up with the thing getting lopsided. And if you test with your fastening equipment, use your dial indicator and mark any high spots with a Sharpie pen before you do this process, you can actually do a little extra sanding on those spots and keep your polishing laps really pretty true. You won't have to send them to the machinist very often if you do that. So you see the Corian that's been sanded off here. Notice that I really didn't take off that much, judging by the amount that was on the sandpaper. I'm not removing a huge amount of material, I'm just cutting through that glaze that's on the surface. I'm feeling the lap, I'm examining it, and I'll dry it off and look at it very closely to make sure that there aren't any glazed areas remaining. If there are any, I'll just give it a little extra sanding. We'll inspect the dry lap to make sure there's no more evidence of glazing or shiny areas, and this looks pretty even. So now that we've inspected it, we're going to scrub the lap, clean off our equipment, clean off our sanding paper so it doesn't get full. And then we're going to use a little vegetable brush, a little scrub brush, and scrub off the lap. Scrub it very thoroughly. Make sure there's no residue, no little bits of Corian on there, no little bits of sandpaper or anything like that. Just clean the lap up really nice, and that's about the amount of scrubbing that's necessary. Now we're going to go dry off the lap. We don't do the dry off by wiping the lap with any kind of a cloth because that's likely to leave little threads or particles or other contamination on it. We just put it on the faceting machine and spin it up to high speed and let it run for 20 or 30 seconds. That'll spin it off. It'll be really nice and dry when we're done. So this is a final inspection from the same angle that we looked at this lap with the same lighting as we looked at it before, and you can see that it's nice and dull. It's nice, even, dull surface. There's no streaks, there's no shiny areas, no glazing at all. And here's a view through a microscope showing the bunches of scratches going in different directions. This is the type of scoring that we like to do on a Corian lap. This is 120 grit carborundum sandpaper. So that's the easy way to resurface or decontaminate a Corian lap. So even if you create a low spot on the lap, unless it's really bad, you won't need to have a machinist resurface the lap right away. Just pay attention to any unevenness, mark it with a Sharpie pen, and then sand it out. Periodically, though, you might want to have the lap turn true if you wind up with a little too much ripple. You can watch videos about how to charge your Corian laps with Voodoo or XXX at facetingacademy.com. If you want to learn how to make your faceting fast and easy, there's more training material there as well. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to resurface or recondition or decontaminate your Corian laps. I hope it saves you a bunch of money, and I hope it saves you a bunch of time. It makes your faceting a lot more fun.